Deleted session, January 9, 1978. Good evening. Now, the message of the Christ entity was, in religious terms, you are all child of God, the sinner as well as the saint. Indeed, according to the original Christ thesis, while a man could sin, no man was identified as a sinner. He was not identified with his failures or limitations, but instead with his potential. The Christ entity knew the vitality, power, and strength of means. That vitality allows for different readings, of course, and through man's changing development, he reads his means differently. Yet, they serve as containers for intuitional knowledge. Christ's thesis was inserted into a Jewish tradition dealing deeply with guilt, and the new thesis was meant to temper that tradition and to spread beyond it. Instead, while carrying the belief in man's potential, Christianity smothered the thesis beneath a slag heap of old guilt. Guilt can be used to manipulate people, of course, and it is a fine tool in the hands of government, religion, science, or any large organization that wants to retain its power. Christ dealt with myths, once again, potent ones that stood for inner realities. Christ clothed those realities in colorful stories geared to people's understanding. I am using the name here, Christ, as one person for the sake of discussion, for that entity touched many lives, each leaping into a kind of super-reality as it joyfully played its part in a religious drama. Ron noted, just as I was about to ask. Saint said the message was, do not condemn yourself or others, for Christ well knew that self-righteous condemnation of the self or of one's neighbors served to darken the door through which man might view his own potential and its greater source. The Christian concept of heaven with its riches, God and his bounty, the source of nature itself, all of this in our terms was a symbolic structure, describing in storybook terms the attributes and the characteristics of Framework 2. In our terms, all that is exists in Framework 2 as elsewhere, but Framework 2 represents the source of your non-physical reality. From it flow all of the non-facts of your world. Christ helped to show that you survived that psychically and spiritually, that you returned to the Father in heaven. Literal minds looking for evidential proof would insist that the physical body itself must rise ascending, hence the related stories. The misinterpretation of data. Ask and you shall receive. Christ well knew that that statement was indeed true, but men who condemned themselves, who considered themselves sinners, would not know what to ask for, except punishment to relieve their guilt. Hence, he stressed time and time again that each person was a child of God. He also stressed the importance of a childlike belief, knowing that the adult mind was apt to question, how and when and in what manner can my request be granted? The words, that thy will be done, represented excellent psychological understanding, for according to Christ's teachings, as originally given, God the Father represented the source or parent of the self, who was by nature free from the self's ignorance or lack of understanding at any given time, and who would know better than the non-self those experiences that would fulfill the self's hopes, dreams, and potentials. In this way, with the words spoken, that thy will be done, the self could free itself from its own misconceptions and attract from Framework 2 benefits that it might otherwise not be knowledgeable enough to request. a portion of each person dwells in Framework 1 and Framework 2. Understand that Framework 2 is a psychic, or spiritual or mental structure. In deep terms, of course, it is not a place. It is, if you prefer, a spiritual landscape of far greater resources than the one you know. It brings both the world of your experience in that world, and so it is your source also. Let thy will be done means let me follow those greater dictations of my inner nature, even without all of the distortions. That formula worked for centuries in large measure. The God, the source, was put outside of nature, however, finally becoming a lot too remote, and the story itself became frayed at the edges as men tried to tie intuitive truth to objective fact. Give us a moment. To be a child of God was to tread in your own worth. You could admit failings, transgressions of one kind or another without identifying yourself. Say with failure, the child of God will automatically find salvation, and everyone was a child of God. When Christ said, "Believe in me and you will be saved," he meant believe in your relationship to God, in that you are his son, as I am, and you will surely be saved. Again, he spoke in religious terms, for those were the terms of the times. His knowledge, however, of the innate godliness of the self literally gives the individual the inner support necessary for the exercise of man's fullest potentials. In civil and governmental terms, such a policy could not be tolerated, nor has man yet learned how to deal with that basic principle. It is almost automatic, for example, to label a man a murderer and identify him with his crime. The society never came to terms with the vast complications inherent with Christ's teachings, and so it abandoned them. Man's great exuberant spontaneity has never been allowed its full sweep as a result. Do you want to raise your fingers? Ra said no. She said, you both chafed against the belief of your times that man was a natural aggressor, tainted from birth, that he was damned by his very nature, condemned by his early childhood background, by original sin, or by his genes. At the same time, you were also tainted by those beliefs and seemed to see evidence for them whenever you looked into yourselves, or outward to the world of your fellows. Each person carried the brunt of that self-condemnation. Robert is hardly outstanding in having physical difficulties, and overall your lives and the work speak for more of the potential of personality than of personality's lacks. You set for yourselves a goal of shoving aside all of the beliefs and the distortions for yourself and for others. Now you went beyond your family's beliefs individually, searching for yourselves and trying various roles. You accomplished the quite difficult feat, in certain terms, of finding each other, so that you each had a mate who would aid you in your pursuits, and you tried as best you knew to encourage each other. You were still plagued by remnants of self-disapproval and self-condemnation, however, yet the spontaneous self in each of you managed to push here and there and blaze forth whenever you gave it a chance, with some quite outstanding results. I always have to couch my material for you personally, just ahead of where you are at any given time. Overall, however, the main thrust of the material, of course, has always been way ahead of where you are, practically speaking, at any given time. In terms of your lives, you are able to use certain portions of the material at different times. No one could put it all into working order at once in a given life. Robert then used and enjoyed his spontaneity, and has been developing it along the lines of his understanding. It is not, as it may seem, that he had something of spontaneity and lost it. Give us a moment. Spontaneity knows its own order, and freely comes into order. Years ago, before the psychic experience, he was not, for example, psychically spontaneous to any great degree. He used his writing to hold back and yet contain his innate psychic knowledge. He disapproved of his own dancing, sometimes even of his sexual earnings. Now those disapprovals simply piled up, with resulting physical difficulties. He would, through the years, begin to approve of spontaneity in one more area. Spontaneity in class, for example, or with summary poetry, or in finally approving his own psychic writings. The disapproval was still present, however, yet now and then through the years would come a period of release, of sudden ease and sudden physical improvement. Each time when he suspended self-disapproval, and when, for your reasons, you began to suspend your own. The situation and the faith that you managed to build up in Framework 2 have come to your aid. The own exercises and the wrong exercises are showing results because some of the material has come through again to you from the sessions, and you are jointly suspending your self-disapproval. In religious terms, you will realize you were saved, or a child of God. You have stopped to a degree identifying yourselves with any limitations. When this happens, you actually symbolically say, "Let thy will be done," meaning that my greater nature, my spontaneous nature, flow through me without impediment and without quibbling. Then the benefits from Framework 2 can begin to flow without impediment. The body can right itself, and the methods that you use work. Do you want to raise your hand? Ralph said, "No, I am okay." Say said, "Robert's eyes are definitely improving these last few days, as the strain is being relieved from the rest of the body, the neck area particularly, the jaws and muscles of the brow. Nearly all eye difficulties are related to other stresses in the body." Robert is quite correct. His vision has fluctuated through the years, and in periods of mental case, understanding, and physical improvements, his vision also improves. You both became extremely depressed, thinking in time terms, and concentrating upon past failures, with which you identified. The notes Robert wrote yesterday are extremely important, with their emphasis upon my old, the spontaneous self is the guardian, and added to that from which your very life springs. You can will your spontaneity to express itself, even as you can will it not do. Tell Robert that if he continues in this manner, and if the two of you can manage to maintain your peace of mind long enough, over a 2 or 3 day period, for example, then you can expect rewards in all areas. The inner keys have been turned once again. Now I bid you a fond and encouraging good evening. Ralph said, "Can I ask a question?" Say said, "You may." Ralph said, "This is off the subject, but your material about Christ reminded me of a letter we received from a young woman not long ago. She wanted to know what really happened to Christ if he wasn't crucified." Say said, "Give us a moment. That question in larger context is very difficult to answer. There were several men who together performed the express reported in the Christ story. at plays occurring only roughly in the 33-year period given. Ralph noted, for Christ's life. They said a man was crucified, but he was not one who made up the Christ entity. You understand from stories that have come to you the elaborations and half-truths that people can be convinced are true. None of the men who made up the entity were crucified. They each died. One I believe in India. People do not understand that their dreams become reality, and that the greater drama of history and myth often bear little resemblance to the actual occurrences, but are greater than the physical events. End of session. You will get bits and tidbits on that now and then. Ralph said. Thank you, Seth.